Well, we're going to start off first with Charlie Tolbert from Baylor University, telling us a little bit about his experiences and how working in an RDC has gone for him and what advice he would have to offer. Charlie?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for all you have done. I'm sure impressed, and I've visited about 5 of these places now, and nobody has nicer office setup for sure. The labs all end up looking more or less the same, but what goes around those labs can be almost nothing. In Chicago, we have the administrator's office is right inside the lab, and that's it. There's another little room down the hall where there's a computer. But anyway, this you have potential for really great things here, space-wise even. So good for you. No puns intended. Yeah, well, and not having to feed a parking meter is a wonderful thing. Yeah, I could use up a lot of your time talking about our history at these various centers, but let me start with a story from very early in my career when I was an untenured assistant professor, and the dean of social sciences decided that I was the college computer expert. Sent me to a meeting of the University Computer Committee as his representative. And I was sitting around the table with physicists and various other high-powered people, and they were celebrating the fact that Florida State had just gotten the world's fastest computer, the ETA-10, and it was Mr. Cray had retired from Cray and made it. It was fast. It was really, really fast. But there was an oceanographer sitting there who's I later found out was a member of the National Academy and had Secretary of the Navy professor in his title. And the oceanographer said, I can conceive of new problems now that I could not have conceived of before. Well, this is our equivalent of that. And I say that quite seriously. You can hear a lot. I used to go around with my badge, and I'd hold my badge up and say, this badge opens doors. And I meant it metaphorically, but it really does open doors. It'll open the door here, I think, for many of you. But I like for people to think that way about this, that you have to rethink what's possible. And when you do, you'll find that not only your own work is being advanced, but funding agencies appreciate the fact that you're doing things that some of their other grantees can't or won't. I used to say won't a lot because a lot of people just wouldn't physically get up and come somewhere else. If it wasn't in their office, they wouldn't. And I still hear that story from time to time at campuses that have these things, that some faculty just won't use them. The other thing I would say, just quickly in passing, we started in Washington, but we moved out to Carnegie Mellon, to the RDC there in Pittsburgh, because one of my colleagues was based at Duquesne, Mike Irwin. And in the course of our work there, the RDC went belly up. And it went belly up because some really good people who'd founded that RDC had moved on. And so we always have to sort of be mindful of that. I mean, Baylor's bought into the consortium. We've all bought in. We're here. We want this to work. But there is a lot of what gets studied in these entities is formation and dissolution of entities. And we don't want to be studying the dissolution of this entity. And so we need support. That's how we ended up in Chicago. We're very happy there, but obviously the logistics of going from Waco to Chicago all the time are pretty daunting. And so that's where we are now. So let me give you real quickly some ideas about when I say I can conceive of things now, and I can do things now that I couldn't do before. For about the last 15 years, a dear colleague of mine, Tom Lyson, who recently passed away, but I and a group of people have been studying the positive contributions of small businesses to rural communities. Most of the support comes from agriculture, but not all of it. NSF is another supporter of that. When we first presented our work at PAA in 1996, we were using county business patterns, which is the only thing anywhere near a PUMS on the business side, if you didn't know. A little fellow in the back of the room kept waving his hand. It turned out it was an employee of CES at the time, Alfred Nucci, who's since retired. But he came up with us and made the case, we've got better data. You can measure what you want. You can measure this concept of local business is better. if you'll come and use the internal data. That's one of the jargon terms for the confidential data. And so we took him up on that. And among the things that we found pretty quickly was that we could make a distinction between single and multiple business establishments. So we could truly identify the enterprise that exists only in one place. And that's a good tip. That's probably a pretty locally oriented enterprise. Secondly, we could do things like define local chains. So we talked about multi-locals, maybe an enterprise with all of its pieces or parts within the same, say, county, or same, say, county region or region of counties. And so those are things one could not do on the outside. And we're not business people. We're sociologists by training. And what we really wanted to do was to link the business context of a community to the outcomes for people, the poverty rates, the migration patterns, and so on and so forth. And so at almost every step, we were always linking across these data sets, and that's what we did in those early studies there. And one of them is cited in your handout, so you can go look at that later and read more about that. A more recent challenge was to try to find new rural employers and then describe their first employees. And I'll walk you through this because I want you to see how linking across these different data sets takes you places that you want to go, but in ways that you couldn't go if you didn't have access to these data. We started with what's called the LBD. This is the Bible of CES, frankly. It's the longitudinal business data set. It's been there forever. It's maybe limited in the information that it has in any given year, but you can tell when a business is formed and when it dissolves. You can tell how many years it's in existence, so on and so forth. And so what we did was identify bursts of rural businesses in a given year. But that's a long way from finding people who never had any employees and decided to become employees. But at least we found the bursts. By going to another data set that they have on an annual basis, the Business Register, the SSEL is the jargon acronym for it. In the SSEL, by matching firm identifiers, believe it or not, we can find the equivalent of the Social Security number of the person who applied for the employment identification number for that establishment, usually the entrepreneur, and once the entrepreneur has employees. From that data set, with that indication of the Social Security number, if you will, we can go to something that was mentioned this morning, the integrated ILBD data set. Those are non-employers who are not ever really studied in the regular business database. So we could find, and those people who matched were people who matched the previous year were people who in a year had taken on employees. Okay, and so if you do that year after year, you essentially are able to create these cohorts of new employers. That's a big deal for a rural area. And it's something the USDA is very interested in. But we didn't stop there because we're also interested in who the new employees are. That takes us over into the matched employer household data set that you heard about, LEHD. By matching the business IDs through there, we can find out characteristics of all the people who are employed in that first or second or third year, however many years you want to go, by that particular employer. So 5 huge data sets, lots of macros and lots of spinning numbers and so forth. But yeah, that's the kind of linkage that we're talking about here to get creative. And so now we have data sets and we can answer questions like, who did they hire? Did they hire their friends and neighbors or did they hire people from the outside? That's a big deal in rural development. Okay. We don't want to spend all this money on rural development if it's just going to mean people are moving in from the outside. Well, hey, it's growth, but we'll have that argument in the day. One last example. We have never been satisfied with and you should not be either, satisfied with the geography on the household public use samples. You just shouldn't be. Those pumas are determined differently in every state. You don't know who did it. You don't know why they did it. Some states, they clearly want to maximize spatial detail. In other states, they're following real clear boundaries and without any regard for the total pop and so forth. There are 36 of them in Los Angeles County in the 2000 version. That's not disclosable, by the way, which means it's okay to say it, actually. It's odd jargon for us, but that's what it means. But all that saying, we've never been satisfied. And for 80 and 90, I was part of groups that created our own public use sample with a geography that I created called labor market areas. We continue to do that now, but instead of having to create PUMs and pass it around, we have all the data, essentially if it's ACS or if it's the long form from 2000. We have those data and we essentially superimpose our geography on it. We think it's a whole lot better than PUMAs. But we have the ability to do that because we have the underlying microdata and can organize the geography any way we darn well please. I think I'll stop there. That gives you an idea of what we do.
And the way this is going to work is if you weren't here in the morning, it's now free for all questions. They can be directly about the research or any practice on the RDC. And if you would, please state your name and affiliation so everybody will know. And we're being filmed here, so keep it clean.
Is this on? Okay. With the geographies, one of the questions we have, of course, transportation, the workplace, the home location are real important points in a day for us in our studies. And we're looking at the possibility of being able to explore more of the workplace locations. Is it the work that you've done with geographies, like imposing geographies, has it been in a mapping where you're geocoding and mapping, or has it been based on zip code? What is your geography in these data sets? And is it mapping, or is it more of a data management where you're combining?
It's mostly been the latter, but the GIS part is possible. The establishments are all geocoded. Are all geocoded. So we have those. Those are available in a side data set to LEHD. And in fact, I don't know enough about the programs that are the main drivers of LEHD, but if you just Google LEHD and look at what they have a lot of maps that are already out there that are basically produced for local areas. And they're using the underlying geography all the time.
And if we were to come in and have a proposal that's accepted and have the funding to support us to come in and look at LEHD and workplace locations and administrative data, or with the ACS, are the Tiger files embedded in these geocoding software that we're looking at, or what, do we have to bring in our own address referencing source files?
That's a little. Let Sean take that one.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So the person side records, the person level records from LEHD actually come from the states. It's actually not data that comes from most of the source administrative, like lots of the source administrative data that we use for businesses and employees comes from federal sources. But I think the original idea for LEHD was actually to use W-2 records from the Internal Revenue Service, but that was problematic from, like once lawyers get involved, things take longer, sometimes much longer. So I think that the early inspiration to do LEHD was there was a researcher who had Maryland state UI data, right? So the unemployment insurance programs that all of the states has records on like which workers are working at like which employers. Now, when Charlie says that it's matched down to the establishment level, in the LEHD, they're assigned to an establishment, but, he also mentioned that there's single establishment businesses and multi-establishment businesses. What the LEHD observes is that there's an employer identification number and how many establishments it has, and it knows where those establishments are, but it knows just which workers are assigned to which number. So part of what LEHD does is use data, I believe, from the state of Minnesota, where they actually have them assigned to the establishment, and then they model for all of the other states, the likelihood that the workers are working at which establishment within the multi-unit business. So a lot of that is data that's imputed, multiply imputed. And then the on-the-map data that you can get for LEHD, which people may be familiar with that tool, has a big synthetic database that sits behind it, right? So it's not the real data. The geographies, I think, may be fuzzed somehow. So you can get some information on where workers live and where workers work, and you can do all kinds of interesting things. So, I mean, I think one thing that all of the projects that come to the RDCs have to justify is why they actually need the internal microdata. I think a lot of the people in this room are probably used to working with the public use microsample. So to the extent that you can say, this is what I've done with the publicly available data, but there's so many more things I can do with the microdata. I mean, it's not usually a very difficult thing to sell, but I think it's often the case where if there's related research that you've done using the public use data, because it's much easier to get, that's gonna really signify that, like, the project is really going to be feasible using the internal data too, right? You sort of already done the project, but you can just do a much better job when it sits internally. So, and I will say one thing about Charlie talking about non-employers. I think we're always trying to improve, like the concept of an employee that we use is based on sort of the IRS definition of what an employee is, right? And when we can actually tell that a business is using labor inputs may be different from when we actually see them get an employee. So I think that, researchers at Census sort of internally are always trying to, are there other administrative data sources that we can use to improve our measurement of what are the inputs and outputs that businesses are using or producing? So, sorry.
I have one other administrative question. The personal, what did you call it, the SSS? The
SSEL?
The ability to be approved to use the data on a personal basis?
Oh, yeah, the special sworn status.
How long is that in force for? So if our proposal isn't successful the first time and it takes a year or so to get in, how long is your, because you said to get that, submit that at the same time as your proposal.
The proposal has to be approved before we'll start processing the special sworn status paperwork, actually. So I know that wasn't what was said this morning, but we're not going to start that process until there's an approved project. So those things won't run in parallel.
So you have to go through a federal background check, and it's costly and time-consuming from Census. So if your proposal doesn't get approved, we don't want to have spent thousands of dollars doing the background check. So that's why it has to wait. But once you get SSS, each year you'll have to take 2 training courses. They'll take. Census will tell you they take about 2.5 hours. Most people take less time. As long as you take those 2 training courses every year, renew it, you have SSS as long as you continue to take those training courses.
Yeah, I think the background investigations last for 7 years. So I think that if you were a special sworn status employee for a really long time, you might actually have to renew your SSS, but I don't know. Charlie, have you ever had to renew your SSS?
I just know we're sworn for life.
Right?
Yes, but regardless of when your project's over, you're still sworn for the rest of your natural life from preventing. So just like I am.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Kind of like being an Aggie. My degree's from UT. Let's see. What time for one more question before we turn to Justin Denny? Another question now?
I'll still a question.
This looks like heckling to me.
We talk about geographies, and we went from sort of going from counties to doing a better job of defining small places. There's another concept that we hear all the time when we talk, the other side of the tracks. And people who are using GIS, they may be interested in who's writing on the tracks, but sometimes we're actually interested in understanding on which side of the tracks people are at, because physical spatial boundaries aren't necessarily the same thing as geographic boundaries. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Oh, I agree conceptually, not being the geographer, but, we have a census of space. It doesn't follow political boundaries or political definitions. One of the problems we used to have with and we still have with the Pumas is that they're all within states, which makes it easy to aggregate and disaggregate computer-wise, but people don't stop their journey to work at the state line. If there's a better job on the other side, they're going to go. So I think that's generally my reaction to that. At some place we have to bound things, even when we do research. But it's a shame to use especially arbitrary and boundaries, and especially some that may have been defined differently from state to state, just based on people's way they're going to use things or whatever. And of course, if you really want to get honest about it, I hate to diss on the census too much here because I make a living from it like a lot of you guys do, but
We're used to it.
Yeah, I know you're used to it. But, when they send down the local planning agencies some suggestions about how to draw the tracks and the block groups, they're just suggestions. And so, who knows if Waco and Bryan and College Station did theirs the same way or not. We wish it were more systematic in a way. But, also with the microdata, we can build new geographies from the ground up that may in fact be more meaningful.